She was selling her wedding dress for bread. Then a farmer asked her. One question. The glass was streaked with dust, but the dress still caught light, like it remembered something beautiful. It hung between a rusted scale and sacks of cracked grain, lace yellowing at the edges, sleeves limp, bodice too fine for the world it now faced. No tag, no price, just waiting. Across the street, she stood still, arms crossed tight over her ribs, trying to look like she wasn't staring. Her feet were bare, skin cracked at the heels. One toe bled where a nail had torn it days ago, but she hadn't felt it. Hunger numbed everything now. Her name was Nora, but no one had spoken it kindly in months, not since the train ride west, not since she'd stepped off into a town that didn't want strays, only help or wives. She was neither now. Her dress had once been white as morning snow, worn once and never again. It had been folded in her satchel, buried under a shawl and her mother's worn Bible. It still smelled faintly of cedar and tears. She pressed a palm to her stomach, not from pain, just to steady herself. A man passed by without looking. A dog barked in the alley. Still, she didn't move. The bakery sat 2 doors down. The bell above the door had rung 3 times already today. She hadn't gone in once. But bread was bread, and the dress, no matter what it once meant, couldn't feed a girl who was disappearing by the hour. She took 1 step forward, then another. The street was warm beneath her feet. The sky above didn't care, but the dress in the window watched her pass like it knew what it was about to cost. The bell over the bakery door gave a weak jingle as she stepped inside, the warmth wrapping around her like a lie too kind to trust. The smell of yeast and sugar nearly made her knees buckle. Her fingers tightened around the bundle in her arms, white fabric folded like a burial shroud. The baker didn't look up at first. He was wiping his hands on his apron, muttering about flour prices. She waited, silent, watching the crusts cooling on the rack behind him, her mouth filled with salt, not from hunger but shame. When he finally turned, his eyes caught the bundle, not her face, not her bare feet, just the lace peeking through worn linen. "I don't take clothes," he said, flat. "It's clean," she replied, voice dry and quiet. "Worn once. Good stitching." He looked again, saw more this time, maybe the way her collarbone jutted too far, or the way her hands trembled as she unfolded the dress. Just 1 loaf," she said. "Doesn't even have to be fresh." He stared at the dress, then at her. "Who trades a wedding dress for bread?" he asked, almost without meaning to. She didn't answer, just swallowed hard and looked away. From the back of the store, a shovel scraped. Another man stood there now, broader, taller, quiet. Dust on his boots, mud on his cuffs. He watched her not like a problem, but like a question. She clutched the dress tighter. The baker sighed, turned, and grabbed the smallest loaf. Set it on the counter. She laid the dress down like a goodbye, picked up the bread like it might fall apart in her hands. Behind her, the man in the dirt-covered coat spoke for the first time. "Who were you going to marry?" He didn't mean to be there. He rarely came to town, and never this late. But the rains had washed out the lower field, and the rye needed trading. So he stood in line, mud caked on his boots, a sack of potatoes over one shoulder, and silence worn like a second coat. The bakery was warm, crowded with smells and chatter. But the line was quiet when he stepped in. That's when he saw her. Thin girl, barefoot, dress clutched like a secret she hadn't meant to show. The lace slipped from her fingers as she adjusted her grip, and for a breath, he saw it clear. Not her face, not her bones, the dress. He knew fine work when he saw it. His late sister had sewn with hands fast as water, and she'd once made a dress just like that for a girl who never wore it. Too much grief between the altar and the aisle. This girl, she wasn't wearing it either. She was holding it like it had betrayed her, like love had turned into fabric, and now that fabric was all she had left. When she spoke, her voice was thin. When the baker replied, it was with tired disinterest. But the man with mud on his cuffs, he kept watching. Not rude, not curious, just seeing. She traded the dress and reached for the bread with hands that had forgotten how to hold something soft. Then, without planning to, He spoke. "Who are you gonna marry?" She froze, fingers still on the crust. He didn't flinch under her stare, just waited, quiet and steady, like he was used to answers that took time. She looked down. "No one," she said. "Not anymore." He didn't mean to be there. He rarely came to town, and never this late. But the rains had washed out the lower field, and the rye needed trading. So he stood in line, mud caked on his boots, a sack of potatoes over one shoulder, and silence worn like a second coat. The bakery was warm, crowded with smells and chatter, but the line was quiet when he stepped in. That's when he saw her, thin girl, barefoot, dress clutched like a secret she hadn't meant to show. The lace slipped from her fingers as she adjusted her grip, and for a breath he saw it clear. Not her face, not her bones, the dress. He knew fine work when he saw it. His late sister had sewn with hands fast as water, and she'd once made a dress just like that for a girl who never wore it. Too much grief between the altar and the aisle. This girl, she wasn't wearing it either. She was holding it like it had betrayed her, like love had turned into fabric, and now that fabric was all she had left. When she spoke, her voice was thin. When the baker replied, it was with tired disinterest. But the man with mud on his cuffs, he kept watching. Not rude, not curious, just seeing. She traded the dress and reached for the bread with hands that had forgotten how to hold something soft. Then, without planning to, he spoke. "Who were you gonna marry?" She froze, fingers still on the crust. He didn't flinch under her stare, just waited, quiet and steady, like he was used to, answers that took time. She looked down. "No one," she said. "Not anymore." The loaf was still warm, its crust rough against her palms. She held it close to her chest, like it might vanish if she blinked. The dress sat on the counter behind her now, forgotten by the room, but not by her. It had been the last soft thing she owned. He stood near the door, hands in his coat pockets, watching her like someone might watch a stray dog, not unkind, but uncertain. Dust clung to his sleeves, his hat too weathered to be new, too clean to be carelessness. He looked like a man who never spoke unless it mattered. "Who were you going to marry?" he asked, voice low and even. The question struck clean through the bakery's hush. No laughter, no pity in it. Just the weight of curiosity born from something quiet. She didn't answer, didn't need to. Her jaw tensed, her eyes stayed fixed on the bread in her hands. She wasn't holding food, she was holding the story she didn't want to tell. He didn't move closer, didn't press, just nodded like he understood that sometimes silence carried more truth than words ever could. Behind the counter, the baker cleared his throat, uncomfortable. A fly buzzed near the window. Somewhere outside, a wagon creaked past on dry wheels. The moment stretched. Then she turned, slowly, and walked out, bread clutched like a secret, feet bare on the wooden step. Her head didn't lift, her shoulders didn't square, but she had answered, not with a name, not with a tale, but with silence thick enough to hold grief, shame, and every broken promise that came before. He watched her go, and something in him shifted. Not pity, recognition. She sat on the edge of the step outside the bakery, tearing slow pieces from the loaf, chewing without tasting. Every swallow scratched her throat like sand. The crust scraped her gums raw, but it was food, and it was hers. She didn't look up when the boots stopped in front of her. "You from around here?" the voice asked. She shook her head. "Got a place to stay?" She didn't answer. He shifted, scraping mud from one boot against the other. "I've got a field needs weeding. Barn needs mucking. It ain't charity." She looked up at him then. The sun was behind his shoulder, casting his face in shadow, but she could still see the set of his jaw, the honest tiredness in it. No pity, just offer. "I don't do handouts," she said. He nodded once, didn't offer one. She studied him, searching for the catch. Men didn't give without asking, not in her life, not ever. But her belly was still empty, even after the bread, and her legs felt like reeds in wind. She could walk, maybe another hour, maybe not. "What kind of work?" she asked. "Farm work, dirty, real." Her fingers flexed around the last crust of bread. She didn't trust him, but she trusted the ache in her gut less. He turned without waiting and walked toward a wagon hitched at the corner. Simple, old, sturdy. She followed, climbed up slow, knees aching, hands trembling more than she let show. He gave her space, didn't speak, just flicked the reins. The wagon rolled forward. Behind them, the bakery faded, the dress still folded behind glass. She didn't look back. The crust sat in her lap, half-eaten. The question still hung between them. But for now, she rode. Not bought, not begged, just moving forward. The wagon creaked up a narrow path, flanked by leaning fences and tired trees. The farmhouse came into view slowly, like it wasn't in any hurry to be seen. Nothing about the place was proud. Paint peeled from the siding, the roof sagged in the middle, and the porch steps moaned when he crossed them. But it stood, and that counted for something. He helped her down without touching her, just a quiet gesture and a glance toward the door. She followed, not because she trusted him, but because he hadn't asked a single thing. Not her name, not her past, not even if she planned to stay. Inside, the air smelled of cedar smoke and onions. A kettle bubbled low on the stove, and dust clung to the windows like it belonged there. He set a bowl on the table, filled it with stew, and slid it her way. No words, no expectations. She hesitated. Her hands twitched at her sides. Then slowly, she sat. The first bite made her eyes sting. Not from heat. From the way it didn't taste like desperation. Just meat and carrots and a bit of salt. Like it had been made for someone who mattered. When she looked up, he was already outside, feeding the chickens. She finished the bowl, every drop. When he came back, he handed her a broom, said nothing, just nodded at the floor like that was enough. She took it. Her hands still shook, but they worked. The sweeping was slow, uneven, but honest. Dust rose in golden ribbons through slats of afternoon light. No one asked where she came from. No one asked why she looked like she hadn't been safe in months. The floor creaked beneath her. The house said nothing. And for the first time, that felt like mercy. He never called her girl, never called her you. Just miss, said quiet and plain, like the name didn't matter much, but respect did. She'd been there a week by then, eating when food was offered, working when told, sleeping in the loft above the goats where the wind crept in through the boards. They didn't talk much. He showed her how to milk the cow, mend a broken hinge, patch a tear in her skirt with thread so thick it fought the needle. She watched how he moved, steady, never rushed. A man built out of silence and weather. One morning, as she poured feed into the chicken trough, he called out from the shed. "Miss, you seen the pliers?" They were on the fence post beside him. She picked them up, handed them over. His fingers brushed hers, just barely. She hesitated, then said it. "Nora." He blinked, wiped his hands on a rag. "That your name?" he asked. She nodded once. It was. He looked at her for a long second. Not too long. Just enough. "Well, Nora, then." He said it slow, careful, like he was trying it on for size, and something in her chest cracked open, not painfully, just like a window that hadn't been touched in too long. No one had said her name in months, not since the man in the church. Not since the train, not since the world turned on its heel and left her behind. It didn't fix anything, but it reminded her who she'd been before all of it. And in that moment, with the pliers in his hand and her name on his lips, it felt like she might become her again. Not someone's bride, not someone's burden. Just Nora, still here, still standing. The days slipped into rhythm, like rows plowed straight through hard earth. She rose before the sun, pulled on the same skirt with the patched hem, tied her hair back with a scrap of ribbon she found tucked in the barn rafters. He was always up first, already halfway through feeding the animals, or mending something that didn't ask to be fixed. They didn't speak much, but it wasn't the kind of silence that weighed. It was the kind that filled space like light through a dusty window, quiet, steady, enough. In the barn, they worked without glancing at each other. She held fence rails while he hammered. He steadied the ladder while she swept cobwebs from the loft beams. The hay smelled of sun and old summer. The cows moved slow, their breath warm in the cold morning air. Sometimes she caught herself humming, not loud, not full songs, just small sounds, half-remembered lullabies from a time before things broke. He didn't comment, just let it fill the space between them like music belonged there, like it always had. One afternoon, while she knelt to scrub a feeding trough, he handed her a rag without asking. Their fingers brushed again. She didn't pull away. He pointed to the cracked window at the far end. "Let's in snow," he said. "Just that." She nodded. "I can patch it." It was the first time she offered something without waiting to be told. The sun dipped low. The barn filled with gold. Outside, the wind stirred. But inside, with the animals fed and the chores winding down, the quiet held. Not heavy, not cold, just a kind of peace that didn't need to be named. She hummed again, softer now, and this time he smiled. Just a little, but enough. The wind had calmed by evening, leaving the porch in a hush, only broken by the creak of the rocker and the rustle of dry corn stalks in the distance. The sky was turning that deep purple blue when day gives up and night hasn't yet claimed the world. Nora sat with her knees tucked to her chest, arms wrapped tight around them. Beside her, on the rail, rested the shoes. They were smaller than she remembered. Once white, now stained with dust and years. The leather cracked at the toes, the soles worn thin where she'd once danced, once hoped. She'd found them buried deep in the satchel that had become more dust than cloth, folded beneath the shawl she never wore anymore, under the Bible with her mother's name in the front cover. She didn't remember packing them, but there they were. The shoes meant for church bells and flowers, meant for a future that never showed up. She set them on the porch railing like a question she didn't want answered. The sky darkened. The stars began to slip out, one by one. Behind her, the door creaked once. She didn't turn. He didn't speak. Just left a mug of warm tea on the step beside her and stepped back inside. She didn't drink it. Not yet. She just stared at the shoes until the dark swallowed them, until all she could see was their outline against the sky. She didn't cry, didn't curse, just breathed slow, as if each breath unstitched one more thread from the life she'd almost had. Then finally, she reached out, lifted the shoes gently, and set them down on the porch floor. Not to wear, just to let them rest, like something finally laid to sleep. The storm rolled in low and mean, clouds stacked like fists above the ridge. He'd stayed out too long, trying to brace the south fence before the wind tore it loose. She'd watched from the porch, shawl clutched tight, wanting to call out, but knowing better than to call a man like that in before he was ready. By nightfall, he came in soaked through, face pale under the mud. He didn't complain, just pulled off his coat, boots heavy with water, and sank into the chair by the fire without a word. The next morning, he couldn't rise. His skin burned under her palm, breath short, eyes glassy. She'd seen men like that before, back when fever swept through the mining camps. Men too proud to rest, too quiet to ask. She filled a bowl with broth, brought it to his lips in slow spoonfuls. He didn't thank her, couldn't, just drank. She dampened cloths with snowmelt, pressed them to his forehead, sat beside him through the hours when the wind howled and the cabin creaked and the world felt like it might split at the seams. He muttered once in sleep, something about a fire, about Ellie. She didn't ask who, just pressed the cloth firmer and whispered, "It's not burning now." He didn't respond, but his breathing steadied. On the third night, she sat curled on the floor beside his bed, hands raw from wringing cloth, hair loose down her back. The stew pot simmered low. The cradle near the hearth rocked gently in the draft, though there was no baby to fill it. He had been the one to offer her warmth. Now it was her turn. She stayed, not because she owed him, but because he hadn't left her out in the cold, and neither would she. The fever broke with the first thaw. By then the trees had started to drip, and the snow lost its grip on the roof in slow, heavy sighs. He didn't speak much those first days up from bed, just sipped water, watched the fire, nodded when she brought stew, or laid another log on the embers. She never asked if he remembered what he'd said in his sleep. She figured some ghosts deserved their silence. One morning, she came in from tending the goats, mud on her hem, wind still clinging to her sleeves. The cabin smelled like pine smoke and fresh bread. Her fingers were red with cold. She went to her room to change. That's when she saw it, laid across the end of her bed, folded neat, almost reverent, the dress. Pressed flat, the lace smoothed, the torn seam stitched tight with thread that didn't match but held. There was no note, no explanation, no words at all, just the dress. Her dress. She stared at it for a long time, didn't touch it, just stood there, breath caught somewhere between now and back then. She remembered when she last held it, remembered the weight of it in her arms when she traded it for bread, for survival, for letting go of something she never fully had. And now, somehow, it had come back, not returned with ceremony, not with apology, just returned. He'd found it, somewhere behind the counter, behind whatever life she'd left behind in that dusty little town. Cleaned it, mended it, not to fix the past, but to give her back something of her own. That night, she didn't wear it, but she kept it close, folded it gently into the chest at the foot of her bed, because now it was hers again. She was standing by the line, shaking out a blanket when he said it. The sun had just cleared the hill, pale and sleepy, casting long gold streaks across the frostbitten grass. The chickens scratched near the fence. The air smelled like thaw and firewood. He was hauling a bucket, one hand on the handle, the other wiping sweat from his brow, though the wind was still cold. He paused near the porch, looked up at her. Not long, just enough. "You deserve to wear it happy," he said. Voice low, like he wasn't sure it was his to say. "Not for bread." She froze. The blanket slipped through her hands and drifted down like a slow falling question. He didn't look away, didn't offer more. Just that. Her throat closed up before she could find words. The dress hadn't been mentioned since he'd left it folded on her bed. She'd kept it in the chest, untouched. Too much memory, too much weight. But now the words hung in the air between them. Not pity, not apology, just truth. She bent to pick up the blanket, fingers trembling slightly. "I don't know if I'll ever wear it again," she said finally. He nodded once. "That's up to you." She wanted to ask why he'd gone back for it, why he'd bothered to stitch it clean, press the lace flat, but maybe she already knew. He turned, headed back toward the barn, left her standing there in the morning light, the wind pulling gently at her sleeves. The blanket was still damp, her hands still cold, but something in her chest had shifted. Not healed, not yet, but warmed, and for the first time, the thought of that dress didn't make her ache. It made her wonder. The sun dipped low behind the barn, spilling rust-colored light across the fields. The chores were done, tools hung, boots scraped, firewood stacked in neat rows like a promise against the cold. He washed his hands in the basin, shook them dry, and glanced toward the road. She wasn't there, not packing, not walking away, just rocking, slow and easy, in the porch chair with one knee tucked beneath her skirt and her hair falling loose from its braid. Her eyes weren't fixed on anything in particular, just watching the world settle into quiet. He stepped onto the porch. The boards creaked. She didn't flinch. "You waiting on something?" he asked. She shook her head. He nodded once. Didn't press. Just lowered himself into the other chair beside her, boots stretched toward the steps. A breeze lifted the edge of her shawl and carried the scent of lilac and dry earth. Somewhere in the distance, a cow bellowed low. Nothing urgent. The sky faded from gold to indigo. Still, she stayed. He reached for a tin mug. Poured her one, too. Handed it over like he had 1,000 times before. She took it without thanks. Didn't need to. She'd been sleeping in the loft, eating at his table, mending seams in shirts too worn for goodwill. But this moment was different. She wasn't surviving here. She was choosing it. The chair rocked. The porch creaked beneath their feet. And for the first time, she didn't feel like she had to ask if she belonged. She didn't speak it aloud, but neither of them needed words. She was still here, and he wasn't surprised. The field behind the barn had gone soft with early green, and the sky above was wide open. No clouds, no threat, just space. He stood at the fence mending a post, sleeves rolled, sun on his neck. She was nearby, gathering eggs in a wicker basket, humming low like she always did when her hands were full and her heart wasn't heavy. He didn't plan it, didn't rehearse or wait for the right moment. He just looked over his shoulder, voice rough as gravel but clear. "You want to stay?" he asked. "With me?" She stopped mid-step. The eggs didn't shift. Her hands didn't tremble, but everything in her stilled. Not, "Do you love me?" Not, "Will you marry me?" Not, "Please say yes." Just that simple thing. "You want to stay? With me?" She didn't answer right away. Didn't need to. She set the basket down, walked over slow, wiping her palms on her apron. Her eyes found his, steady, clear, not asking for rescue, not offering it either. Just meeting in the middle. She nodded, once, then again. He didn't smile big, just dipped his head like he'd heard exactly what he hoped to. She reached for his hand, his rough, calloused, too quiet hand, and laced her fingers through his. That was it. No ring, no altar, no crowds, just soil underfoot, birds in the fence posts, and two people who had nothing left to prove, but everything left to live. And when he finally exhaled, like he'd been holding the question in his ribs for weeks, she leaned in close and whispered, "I already have." The church bell rang soft and slow, like it didn't want to wake the morning too fast. The whole town turned out, dust brushed from coats, hair tied neat, boots polished for once. Children swung their legs from the fence rail, waiting. Women held hands. Men stood stiff in collars, too tight. And there she was. Same dress, same lace at the hem, same tiny pearl buttons up the back. But it didn't hang like a goodbye this time. It moved with her. The sun hit it just right, and for a second it glowed. White, not from untouched innocence, but from something stronger. Forgiveness, survival, choice. The she walked slowly down the dirt path, chin lifted, eyes forward. She didn't clutch the skirt or hide her hands. She didn't flinch at the stairs, because they weren't stairs anymore. They were watching, and she was worth watching. The man at the end of the path stood in his cleanest shirt, beard trimmed, hat in hand. He didn't fidget, didn't shift from one boot to the other. Just waited like he'd been waiting his whole life for this, and could wait a little longer if she needed him to. She didn't. When she reached him, he didn't offer an arm. He offered his hand. She took it. There were no vows read, no scripture, just a nod from the preacher and the wind slipping gently through the oaks. But it was enough, because this time she wasn't wearing the dress to trade for bread. She wasn't running from shame or ghosts. She wore it because she'd earned it, because he'd seen her when she was broken and never asked her to pretend she wasn't. And now, together, they were walking forward, toward something new, still white, still hers. The smell of bread filled the cabin now. Not desperation, not trade, just warmth, just home. She baked in the mornings, flour on her sleeves, hair tied back in a loose knot that never quite stayed. The dough rose in a bowl by the window, kissed by sunlight, rising soft and patient. He came in from the field with dirt on his boots and a quiet in his bones that matched hers. Set his hat on the hook, his eyes on the oven. She'd already laid the table, 2 bowls, 2 spoons, a crust still warm between them. They didn't speak much. They didn't need to. He passed her the butter dish. She passed him the knife. Their hands brushed in the middle of the table and lingered there, rough palms against flour-dusted fingers. She fed him now, not to repay, not to prove, but because he was hers, and she was his, and that was enough. Once, she had clutched that same loaf like it might save her life. Once, she had traded lace for crumbs, but now the bread was hers to give. She kneaded it with care, sliced it thick, served it hot. He ate slow, always had. But now and then, he'd reach across the table, touch her wrist, his thumb tracing the curve of her skin like a thank you he never had to say aloud. Outside, the wind moved through the fields, soft as breath. Inside, the fire crackled low. The cradle by the hearth held a sleeping child, hers by blood, his by love. And in the hush of that little room, there was no hunger left. Only hands held, only warmth shared, only bread for the table, not the trade, and a life not bought, but chosen.